The air in my father's grand hall was thick with pine resin and fear. It was a sharp, sour scent that clung to the back of the throat, a far cry from the perfumed illusions we usually maintained. I knew that smell. It was the scent of a desperate man bargaining for his life, dressed up in velvet and ceremony. I pressed myself deeper into the cold stone shadows beside the hearth, a spot I'd claimed since childhood. From here, I could watch the entire performance without being part of it. The flickering candlelight danced across faces I'd known my whole life, faces that had always looked right through me. "Your Majesty," my father's voice boomed, each syllable a heavy stone dropped into the silent hall. It was the voice of a lord, but it trembled with the false confidence of a man facing a storm. "I present my daughters." I didn't need to look to know that Ilara was radiant. My elder sister had that effect. She didn't just enter a room, she commanded it. The very atmosphere seemed to rearrange itself around her, drawn to her beauty like moths to a flame. I heard it then, the collective, sharp intake of breath from the council, the guards along the walls, the few trusted nobles. Ilara, in sapphire silk, her hair a cascade of nightfall, her chin lifted to catch the light like a jewel on display. And then there was me, Kaelin. I were gray, always gray, the color of stone, of shadows, of things easily forgotten. My pale hair was a simple, practical braid. I had chosen my place by the servants' entrance deliberately, where the hearth's warmth didn't quite reach and the shadows were deepest. It was an old habit. When you've spent 23 years living in the blinding light of someone else's perfection, you learn where to stand so the contrast doesn't wound you so deeply. The Lycan king hadn't spoken. From my shadowed nook, he was just a silhouette, tall, immovable, crowned with dark hair. He was a still point in the room's nervous energy, but I could feel him, a pressure in the air, a silent hum of power. It was like standing beside a dormant volcano. You didn't need to see the fire to know it could erase you. "Take the fair one," my father continued, gesturing to Ilara with a flourish. The words were a familiar ice settling in my chest. Not surprise, never surprise. Just the old, cold ache of a truth I carried like a stone in my pocket. Ilara is celebrated throughout the Eastern marches for her beauty and grace. She would make a fitting queen for your noble people. No. The word was a crack of thunder in the hushed hall. The king's voice was low, rough, as if unaccustomed to wasting sound on trivialities. It wasn't loud, but it silenced everything. My father's face, I watched it cycle through confusion, to embarrassment, and finally to a raw, panicked terror. "Your Majesty, I assure you, Ilara is—" "I can see what she is." The king finally moved, stepping from the gloom. His boots echoed, a predator's measured pace on the stone. He walked toward Ilara, but his gaze was clinical, dissecting. Lovely, polished, trained to smile and stand and speak precisely as expected. Each word was a verdict. I saw Ilara's perfect posture waver, a tiny fracture in her porcelain composure. "A mirror," the king concluded, turning his back on her, empty of everything but reflection. My father sputtered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn when the Lycan emissaries first arrived with their ultimatum. Our lands were besieged by a creeping, nameless darkness from the northern wilds. Villages vanished. Their king needed a bride to seal an ancient alliance. We needed his warriors to survive. A simple, brutal transaction. A daughter for safety. The king's pale eyes, the color of winter mist, scanned the room. "There is another." My heart simply stopped. No, he couldn't mean. His gaze landed unerringly on my shadowed corner, the one trying to become part of the stonework. Every eye in the hall swiveled at me. The weight of their attention was a physical force, pushing the air from my lungs. The shadows I'd wrapped myself around like armor turned to gossamer, useless. I was naked in the light. "Kaelin," my father choked out, the name sounding foreign on his lips. "That's just Kaylin. She's not. She is precisely what I'm looking for." The king, Kalar, I would learn his name later, stepped fully into the firelight. He was younger than I expected, yet his dark hair was shot through with strands of silver at the temples. His face was all harsh angles and restrained power, like a cliff face shaped by relentless winds. But it was his eyes that held me, pale, piercing, seeing everything. "Come here," he commanded. It was not a request. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me from my safe darkness into the terrible brightness of the hall's center. I was acutely aware of the whisper of my worn dress, the loose strand of hair at my temple, the violent trembling I could not control. I stopped a few paces from him, close enough to see the fine scar that bisected his left eyebrow, to smell the scent of frost and fur, and something wild that made my very blood stir with ancient alarm. "Look at me." I realized my eyes were fixed on the floor. I forced them up, meeting that winter-gray gaze. The world narrowed to just that. He was looking through me, seeing the layers I'd spent a lifetime building. "Your name?" "Kaylin," I whispered, then found a stronger voice. "Kaylin, Your Majesty." "Why were you hiding?" The directness stole my breath. I could have lied. I should have lied, but something in those wolf-pale eyes told me he would taste the falsehood. So I gave him the bitter truth. "Because no one looks for me anyway." A gasp from Ilara, a choked sound from my father. "You didn't say such things. You didn't admit your own invisibility." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a spark of recognition. "If I look for you now," he said, his voice dropping, "then it seems you have been found." He moved closer, a wolf circling its curious prey. I forced myself to stand still. "Your father offered me beauty, power wrapped in silk. Do you know what I see when I look at your sister?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "A gildy tage. Beautiful, but a cage nonetheless." He completed his circle, standing before me again. "But you have learned to live in the cracks of your own world, to be overlooked, underestimated, forgotten, to observe from the silence. Those are not weaknesses, Kaylin. In my world, they are vital skills." "Your world?" The words felt heavy. "The Frostfang Pact. 300 Lycans bound by blood, moon, and laws older than your stone walls. They will test you. Some will wish for you to fail. Many will assume you already have. Because I'm human? Because you're quiet. Because you seem breakable." His gaze pinned me. "But I have found the most dangerous creatures are often the ones no one bothers to see." This was impossible. A dream or a nightmare? Kings did not choose the forgotten daughter. And yet, I don't understand. Why? For the first time, I heard something beneath the granite of his voice. Something lonely and weary. "I do not need a decoration for my hall. I need a partner who understands what it means to hold on when the world tries to make you let go." He turned then, his voice rolling over the stunned hall. "Lord Baron, I accept your offer of alliance. Your daughter, Kaylin, will return with me to Frosthold as my intended queen. The binding will be under the next full moon." The hall erupted. My father's protests were swallowed by the roar. Ilara's face was a mask of shock. But I heard none of it. My life had just been rewritten in a handful of sentences. King Kylar extended his hand, a broad palm, scarred knuckles, a hand that could shatter or shield. "We leave at dawn. Bring only what you need. The trappings of this gilded world will not serve you where we are going." Behind me, I felt the weight of my father's desperation, Ilara's jealousy, a lifetime of being less than. I heard my mother's voice, a ghost from years past. "Steady heart, steady hands, my shadow girl. That is how you endure." I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm, certain, and inescapable. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. "At dawn, then," I said, and my voice did not shake. His grip tightened, a faint, approving pressure. At dawn. But as he released me to speak with my father's advisors, my eyes caught a movement at the hall's edge. A man lingered in the archway, clad in dark traveler's leather. He was not part of our household, nor of the Lycan entourage. His eyes, reflecting the firelight with an odd amber gleam, were fixed on me. When our gazes met, his lips curved into a smile, slow, sharp, and full of secrets. Then he was gone, melting into the dark corridor as if he were made of smoke. A cold tremor, unrelated to the king's presence, snaked down my spine. I pressed my hand to my stomach, the triumph of the moment suddenly clouded. The king had chosen me for reasons I barely grasped. In mere hours, I would leave for a world of teeth and moonlit power, and someone, or something, had been watching with an interest that felt like a threat. The firelight seemed to grow colder, the shadows more hungry. What exactly had I just agreed to? I did not sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale, assessing eyes, or the chilling smile of the stranger in the shadows. My room, always too large and too empty, felt like a cage. I moved through the motions of packing with a numb detachment. What did one bring to a fortress of wolves? My few dresses were simple, sturdy wool, meant for practicality, not court. I folded them anyway, my hands working while my mind raced in frantic circles. A soft rustle at my doorway. Ilara stood there, still in her sapphire gown, though her perfect hair was now loose around her shoulders. In the single candle's light, she looked younger, almost vulnerable, an expression I seldom saw. "You cannot be serious about this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't believe I was given a choice," I replied, folding a gray tunic. "There is always a choice. Refuse him. Tell father you won't go. Tell the king you're unsuitable." She stepped into the room, the scent of her rosewater perfume clashing with the dust and old paper. "I could go. I was prepared. I am the one who should be going." I finally turned to look at her. "You heard him, Ilara. He doesn't want prepared. He doesn't want beautiful." "Then what does he want?" The question was laced with genuine confusion and a hint of scorn. I looked down at my hands, at the faint scars from herb gathering and quiet chores. "Someone who knows how to be invisible," I said softly. "Someone who has survived in the silence." Ilara let out a short, bitter laugh. "And you think that will help you with them? Kaelin, they are beasts, monsters from stories. They will tear you apart." "Perhaps," I said, turning back to my bag, tucking my mother's old journal of healing herbs and sketches into the bottom. It was the only thing of hers I had. "But at least I will be somewhere I was chosen for what I am, not for what I look like." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was small, almost afraid. "What if you don't come back?" The question hung between us. We had never been sisters in any true sense of the word. How could we be, when our father had defined us as opposites, the jewel and the flaw? Yet, beneath the rivalry, there was a shared history, a shared blood. "I suppose you will have everything you ever wanted," but I softened the words with a glance. It wasn't malice, just the bleak truth we both knew. To my utter shock, she crossed the room in a rush of silk and wrapped her arms around me in a tight, desperate embrace. "Be careful," she whispered in my hair, her voice thick. "Please, I know I have been awful, but I don't want you to die out there in the dark." I stood frozen, then slowly brought my arms up to return the hold. It was awkward, unfamiliar. "I will try not to." She pulled back, her eyes gleaming. "If he hurts you—" "I will find a way to endure it," I finished for her. "I always do." She left without another word, leaving me alone with the echo of her fear and my own pounding heart. Dawn arrived, gray and cold. I stood in the main courtyard, my single bag at my feet, watching Lycan warriors load supplies onto horses that were giants compared to our own. They were creatures of muscle and storm, their breaths pluming in the chill air. They watched me with open curiosity or veiled contempt as I descended the steps. "You are punctual," Kalar observed. He was already mounted on a stallion the color of midnight. "Good. I have no patience for delays." One of the warriors, a woman with fiery braids and eyes like molten gold, stepped forward. "This is your solution, Kylar. She looks like a stiff breeze would snap her." "Then we shall hope the winds are gentle, Lyra." His tone mild but edged with steel. A warning. Lyra's lips quirked. She looked me up and down. "Can you even ride, little human?" "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to steadiness. "I am not entirely helpless." A snort came from a massive, scarred man nearby. "We'll see." "Kalar rides with me until the forest border," Kalar declared, ending the discussion. He extended a hand down. It was a test. In front of his pack, in front of my father's household, he was asking for my trust. I took his hand, felt that same firm warmth, and let him pull me up behind him. The horse shifted, and I instinctively gripped his waist, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath the leather. "Hold on," was all he said before spurring the horse forward. We left my home at a gallop. I clung to Kalar's back, the world blurring into a rush of wind and thunderous hooves. The others fell into formation around us, a moving fortress of fur and fang. I felt my otherness then, a human speck in a stream of primal power. We rode for hours. The tame fields and orchards of my father's lands gave way to wild, rolling hills and ancient, twisted forests. The air grew sharper, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. It was a raw, untamed beauty that spoke to something restless deep inside me. Near midday, Kalar slowed by a swift, clear stream cutting through a meadow. He dismounted with effortless grace and reached up to help me down. My legs nearly buckled, trembling from hours of tense riding. He steadied me, his hand firm on my elbow. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "Better than I expected." "Your expectations of humans must be very low," I managed, rubbing my stiff thighs. That earned me another one of his almost smiles. With humans, usually. He released me to address the others. "Rest here, 1 hour." The group dispersed with efficient ease. I stood awkwardly by the stream, unsure of my place. Lyra appeared beside me, offering a water skin. "Drink. We don't stop for weakness." "Thank you." "Don't. I'm not doing you a favor." She crossed her arms, her golden eyes appraising. "Kayelar has his reasons, but bringing a human to Frosthold, it will cause storms you cannot weather." "Why not try to stop him then?" She laughed, a harsh sound. "No one stops Kayelar when his mind is set. We learned that long ago." Her gaze hardened. "But that doesn't mean we must like his choices." "I didn't ask to be chosen." "No," she conceded, her expressions shifting to something oddly like grudging respect. "A word of advice. Don't pretend to be what you're not. The pack will smell a lie like blood in the water. Whatever he sees in you, lean into that. It's your only chance." Before I could ask what she meant, a sound ripped through the peaceful afternoon, a long, mournful howl that lifted the hair on my arms and neck. Every lichen went rigid, heads snapping up, bodies coiling. Kayelar was moving before the echo faded. "The northern ridge," he growled, his face hardening into something fearsome. "That's Corvin's territory," the scarred man said, his voice tight. "I know." Kayelar's eyes scanned the tree line. "Mount up, now." "What is it?" I asked, as Lyra practically pushed me toward Kayelar's horse. "A rogue," she said, her voice clipped with fear. "And if Corvin is howling a warning, it's close." I didn't understand, but the dread in her voice was explanation enough. Kayelar pulled me up in front of him this time, one arm locking like an iron band around my waist. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a rough whisper by my ear. "Whatever happens, do not run. Running triggers the hunt. You stay still, you stay quiet. Do you understand?" I could only nod, my throat sealed shut by terror. We rode hard toward the sound, a terrible chorus of howls now guiding us. The forest grew denser, darker. And then I saw him, a man in the clearing ahead, but wrong. His form shimmered, flickering between human and something monstrous, limbs too long, eyes burning with a feverish, insane light. Blood smeared his mouth and hands. "Kayelar," the creature rasped, its voice the sound of grinding stone. "You've brought me a gift." Those mad eyes fixed on me with a hunger that turned my bones to ice. "She smells of sunlight and softness. I am starving." "Stand down, Bren," Kayelar commanded, authority rolling off him in waves. "You know the law. The madness has you, but you can still end this with honor." "Honor?" The rogue, Bren, laughed, a cracking, horrible sound. "I am burning from the inside out, and she is a balm." "Last warning," Kayelar said, and his voice dropped into a register that vibrated in my chest. A promise of violence. "Walk away." "Make me." The world exploded. Kayelar moved so fast he blurred. One moment I was against him. The next, I was being passed to Lyra on the ground. "Get her back," he ordered, and then he was leaping from the horse. I knew he was Lycan. I knew it in my mind, but knowing and seeing are worlds apart. His body, it rippled. Clothes tore as fur, not brown or black, but a deep storm cloud gray shot through with silver, erupted over his skin. He was massive, powerful, a creature of myth and nightmare made flesh. And his eyes, those same pale, intelligent eyes, now set in the fierce face of a wolf. Bren's transformation was a mockery of it, an agonized twisting, bones snapping audibly, caught in a horrific halfway state. The sound he made was half snarl, half scream of pure agony. "Don't watch," Lyra said, pulling me back, but I was rooted. Kayelar met Bren's lunge mid-air. The impact was a thunderclap of muscle, tooth, and claw. The other Lycans had shifted, forming a ring, but did not interfere. This was between Alpha and Rogue, a terrible, final law. It was brutal, swift, and merciful. Bren was strong, driven by madness, but Kayelar was controlled, precise. A clash, a spray of blood that steamed in the cold air, a snap of jaws. It was over. Bren lay still, his form settling finally into that of a man, middle-aged, his face lined with what might have once been kindness. Kayelar stood over him, in human form, naked and blood-spattered, his head bowed. The scarred man draped a cloak over his shoulders. The others moved to tend to Bren's body with a somber, ritualistic care. I stood shaking, Lyra's grip the only thing keeping me upright, trying to process the savage beauty and the profound sorrow of what I had just witnessed. This was the world I was entering, not just power, but the terrible weight of it. Kayelar's head lifted, his eyes found mine across the clearing, across the body of his fallen friend. In them, I did not see a monster, but a king bearing a lonely, bloody crown. And in that moment, my fear shifted, crystallizing into something entirely else, a dawning, terrifying understanding. The silence after the fight was heavier than any noise. Kayelar stood motionless over the body of the man he'd once called friend, blood and ash mingling on his skin. I watched as his warriors moved with solemn purpose, gathering wood without a word spoken. They were building a pyre for Bren, their movements reverent, despite the violence that had just ended his life. Lyra finally released my arm, her expression unreadable. "Go to him," she murmured, giving me a slight push. My feet felt like blocks of ice, but I moved anyway. The scent of blood and wildness filled the clearing, but underneath it was something else, the sharp, clean smell of pine and the coming frost. Kaelar's head lifted, his eyes found mine across the clearing, across the body of his fallen friend. In them, I did not see a monster, but a king bearing a lonely, bloody crown. And in that moment, my fear shifted, crystallizing into something entirely else, a dawning, terrifying understanding. "You should be afraid of me now," he questioned, his voice quieter than I felt. "I was afraid of you before," I admitted, my voice steadier than I felt. "This just showed me what my fear should look like." He turned then, those winter-pale eyes searching my face. Most humans would be running, screaming. "Where would I run to?" I gestured, to the forest that surrounded us on all sides. "And screaming seems useless. He was your friend. I'm sorry you had to do that." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprise or pain. Bren taught me to track when my wolf first awakened. He was patient when others mocked a young alpha struggling to control his shifts. Kaelar's jaw tightened. The madness takes slowly, a crack in the spirit, a fracture between man and beast. By the time we see it clearly, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. "What causes it?" I asked softly. "We don't know. Sometimes grief. Sometimes a wound that never heals right. Sometimes," he looked at the gathering pyre, "sometimes it just happens. It is the shadow that follows every one of us, the fear that one day the balance will tip and will become what you saw." I remembered Lyra's words from earlier. It comes for all of us eventually. To live with that knowledge that your own mind might betray you, turn you into a monster your pack would have to put down. That's why the laws are so strict, I realized aloud. The hierarchy, the discipline. It's not just about power. It's about survival, about holding back the madness. Kaelar looked at me sharply, really seeing me for the first time since the fight. "You see more than you should for someone who's lived in gilded cages." "I told you," I said, meeting his gaze. "Being invisible teaches you to observe." The pyre was ready. The warriors gathered around and they began to sing. It wasn't a song with words, not any I knew. It was a low, haunting melody that rose and fell like wind through mountain passes, a death chant, a farewell. Kaelar joined them, his voice deeper than the others, weaving through the melody like a dark thread. I stood apart, a human witness to a sacred Lycan ritual, feeling both an intruder and strangely honored. When the last note faded and the flames had consumed Bryn's body to ash and memory, Kaelar came to stand beside me. "We'll camp here tonight. Frosthold is 2 days' ride, and the horses need rest." "Will the others," I hesitated, "will they challenge your choice now, after seeing me, after this?" "They were always going to challenge," he said bluntly. "But yes, seeing you witness a rogue's end and not flee, it will make some think. Others will simply see it as proof of your foolishness." He studied me. "Tomorrow we enter pack territory. The real test begins, not of strength, but of will. My people will watch your every breath, judge your every step." "I'm ready," I lied. He almost smiled. "No, you're not, but you will be." He started to turn away, then paused. "Thank you, Kaelin." "For what?" "For not running. For asking about Bryn instead of just seeing a monster. He shook his head. "Just thank you." He walked away to join his warriors, and I was left alone with the dying fire and the ghosts of what might have been. That night, as I lay in my bedroll staring at stars that seemed closer and colder here, I heard it, a howl in the distance. Not the warning cry from earlier, not the death chant. This was different, lonely, searching, and from another direction an answering howl, then another. They were talking to each other, passing messages on the wind. I thought of the stranger in my father's hall, the one with the amber-eyed smile. Was he out there somewhere, listening to these howls? Was he one of them? Sleep finally came, but it was restless, filled with dreams of shifting shadows and eyes that watched from the dark. The gates of Frosthold appeared like something carved from the mountain's very bones. They weren't wood and iron, but living stone intertwined with ancient silver-barked trees that seemed to grow in impossible patterns. Symbols glowed with faint blue lights along the archway, runes of protection, of boundary, of home. Beyond the gates, the settlement clung to the mountainside, structures of stone and timber connected by rope bridges and steep staircases. Smoke curled from chimneys cut into rock faces, and everywhere there were eyes. They lined the path as we rode through, Lycans in both forms, watching with open curiosity or barely veiled hostility. Children with two sharp teeth peered from behind adults. Warriors stood with arms crossed, assessing. I saw Lyra tense beside me, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. Kalar rode straight-backed, his face a mask of calm authority, but I felt the tension in the muscles of his back where my hands gripped his cloak. He was braced for a storm. "They've been waiting," Lyra muttered. "By now, every soul in Frosthold knows what you are, what he's done. And they're not pleased," I finished for her. "Pleased?" She gave a short, sharp laugh. "The pack has been without a Luna for 7 years, since Alara died. Many thought he'd choose a warrior's daughter, strengthen clan alliances. Instead," she gestured at me, "he brings home a human ghost." Alara, his first queen. I filed the name away, another piece of the puzzle that was Kalar. We dismounted in a central courtyard paved with smooth river stones. Immediately we were surrounded. The air thickened with scents, wet fur, pine, iron, wild herbs. Voices rose in a clamor. "A human? She's smaller than I imagined. What can she possibly offer? This is an insult to Alara's memory." Silence. Kalar's voice didn't roar. It simply cut through the noise like a blade, leaving stillness in its wake. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "This is Kaylin," he announced, his words carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "She has survived the journey, witnessed a rogue's end without flinching, and by my word and will, she will be your Luna under the next full moon. You will treat her with the respect the position demands, or you will answer to me. Is that understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd, reluctant but present. The crowd parted as a woman approached. She was older, her hair dark streaked with silver, her eyes the color of glacier ice. She moved with the absolute certainty of someone who has never questioned her place in the world. "Kalar." Her voice was cool, measured. "So this is the solution you found." "Helena," Kalar acknowledged with a slight nod. "My second. Helena, this is Kaylin, who has led Frosthold's warriors for 40 winters." Helena's icy eyes swept over me, and I felt assessed, weighed, and found wanting all in one glance. "What can you do, girl?" she asked, her tone deceptively mild. "Can you hunt, fight, lead a war party, heal a gut wound, sing the moon chants?" I took a steadying breath. "No," I said clearly, "I cannot do any of those things." Her eyebrows raised slightly. At least I had her attention. "Then what, then, are you for?" I thought of my mother's journal in my bag, of years watching from shadows, of learning the language of silences. I can listen. I can see patterns others miss because they're too busy being the pattern. I can survive in places that would break those who only know how to be strong. I met her gaze. And I can endure. Helena stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned to Kalar. "She's honest, I'll give her that. Foolishly so." She looked back at me. "The trials begin tomorrow at dawn. First, the hunt. If you survive that, we'll see about the rest." Her voice hardened. "No special treatment because you're human. No mercy. Either you're strong enough to stand beside him or you're not. Tomorrow we learn which is which." She turned and walked away as the crowd parted for her, as they had for Kalar. Kalar guided me towards the largest structure, the great hall. Helena's approval matters, he said quietly as we walked. She was Alara's closest friend. Her word carries weight with the elders. And I just failed to earn it. You didn't fail. You were honest. That's a start. He led me to a set of rooms high in the hall. They were spacious, with the fireplace already lit, furs on the bed, and a window that looked out over the entire settlement. These are your quarters. Mine are through that door. He pointed to a connecting door, if you need anything. Kalar, I stopped him as he turned to leave. The hunt? What is it? He paused, his expression grim. You'll be given an hour's head start. Then the pack hunts you through the forest. If you make it to moonrise without being caught, you pass. And if I'm caught? Then you fail, and I choose another. He said it plainly, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. Rest, Kaylin. Tomorrow requires all your cleverness. After he left, I stood at the window, watching the settlement below. Somewhere out there, warriors were preparing to hunt me. They expected a terrified human girl running blindly, easy prey. But I hadn't survived my father's house by being predictable. I'd survived by learning to think like the shadows themselves. I retrieved my mother's journal, flipping to the pages about forest plants. Nightshade for confusion, wild garlic to mask scent, stinging nettle for defense. I had an hour's head start. I would need every second. A soft knock at the connecting door. Enter. It wasn't Kalar. A young man stood there, perhaps a few years older than me, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that held a strange green-gold light. Kaylin, he said with a slight bow, I'm Theron, Helena's son. I stiffened. Does your mother send a message? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My mother sends no one. I come on my own. He stepped into the room, looking around with apparent curiosity. You're smarter than you look. Reading already? It's a book on healing herbs. Useful. He came to stand beside me at the window. Word of advice for tomorrow. Don't go for the river. Everyone expects the prey to follow water, to try to mask their scent. Go high instead. The Stone Fang Crags, North Quadrant. The climb is brutal, but most won't expect a human to attempt it. I studied him suspiciously. Why help me? Who says I'm helping? His smile turned sharp. Maybe I just want the hunt to be interesting. Watching a human scramble straight into a trap is boring. Watching one actually try to survive, he shrugged, that's entertainment. Or maybe, I said slowly, you have your own reasons for wanting the status quo shaken up. Theron's expression shifted, the amusement fading. My mother has been running this pack from the shadows since Alara died. Kalar rules, but she influences. Some of us think Frosthold needs new winds. He looked at me, really looked. If you're just another weak human, you'll die tomorrow and nothing changes. If you're something else, well, that benefits everyone who's tired of living in the same old stories. He left as quietly as he came, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the chilling certainty that tomorrow wasn't just about survival. It was about politics, about power plays I didn't yet understand. That night, I dreamed of running, but in the dream, I wasn't being chased by wolves. I was chasing something, a flicker of light just ahead, always out of reach, and behind me, not howls, but laughter. Cold, amber-eyed laughter. Dawn came wrapped in freezing mist. I dressed in layers of gray and brown, colors of stone and shadow. I braided my hair tight, tucked my mother's journal into an inner pocket, and filled my belt pouch with what I'd gathered from the hall's herb stores after Theron left. The entire pack filled the courtyard, a sea of watchful faces and sharp eyes. Kalar stood on a raised stone platform with Helena. He wore ceremonial marks on his face, ash and ochre in patterns that spoke of ancient things. He looked every inch the Alpha King, and when his eyes found mine, there was no softness in them, only the weight of expectation. Helena's voice rang out. Kaylin, step forward. I climbed the steps, my legs steady despite the fear singing in my blood. The hunt is the first trial. It tests cunning, endurance, and the will to survive. Kaylin will have 1 hour's head start. She may use any means to evade capture. The only rule, she does not cross the boundary stones. She turned to me. If you reach moonrise uncaptured, you pass. If you are caught, you fail. Do you understand? Yes. Do you accept this challenge, knowing it may mean your death? I looked at Kalar, his expression unreadable. I thought of my father's hall, of always being the afterthought, of Theron's ambiguous warning, of the amber-eyed stranger. This was my choice, not to be chosen, but to accept what came after. I accept. Helena nodded. Then let the hunt begin. Your hour starts now. I didn't run, not at first. I walked calmly from the courtyard, through the gates, and into the forest. I heard murmurs behind me, surprise, derision. They expected panic. I gave them purpose. Once the trees swallowed me, I moved, not toward the river whose sound I could already hear, but north, as Theron had suggested. The ground sloped upward immediately, the air growing thinner. I climbed, using techniques I'd learned as a child sneaking through my father's estate, quiet feet, careful handholds, leaving as little trace as possible. As I climbed, I worked. Nightshade berries crushed and smeared on occasional rocks, wild garlic rubbed on my clothes and skin. I scattered crushed mint in places, its strong scent a confusion. Small delays, psychological warfare. The Stonefang crags were exactly as described, a jagged maze of rocks and narrow passages. I scrambled to a high crevice, barely wide enough for my body, and waited. From here, I could see the forest below, and I heard them. The howl. It wasn't one, but a chorus, rising, falling, communicating. The hour was up. The hunt had begun. They moved like a coordinated tide through the trees below. I counted at least 30 wolves, their coats a spectrum of forest colors. Helena, a massive wolf with fur like iron and those ice-chip eyes, led a group directly toward the river. Others fanned out. One wolf, smaller and lighter than the rest, Lyra, I thought, paused at the base of the crags. Her head lifted, scenting. I pressed myself into the stone, barely breathing. After a long moment, she bounded away, following the others. I waited until the sounds faded, then began phase 2, misdirection. I climbed down carefully, retraced my path part way, then broke east, moving parallel to my original trail, but staying on rocky ground. My muscles burned, my water was gone, and my hands were scraped raw. But I kept moving, kept thinking. By midday, I found the stream, not the main river, but a tributary. I waded into the icy water, gasping at the cold, and followed it upstream until I found a fallen tree forming a natural bridge over a narrow gorge. Perfect. I crossed carefully, then used my knife to cut strips from my undershirt. I tied them to branches leading away from the tree, dropped a few spots of blood from a deliberate cut on my palm, and scuffed the ground. A false trail. Then I doubled back across the tree and squeezed into the hollow space beneath the trunk, shrouded by hanging roots and ferns. I waited. They found my false trail within the hour. I heard voices, human now, the hunt allowing for both forms. "She's cleverer than expected," a voice said, Lyra's. "Using plants to confuse the scent trail, creating false signs?" That was a male voice I didn't recognize. "Helena says she was just a soft human," Lyra replied. "Helena says many things," came another voice, younger. "Theron?" "Doesn't make them true. The question is she clever enough? We'll find out at moonrise. Come, the blood trail leads east. She's probably trying to circle back toward the settlement." Their footsteps faded. I allowed myself a small, trembling breath of relief. It was working. The sun began its descent. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. Thirst was a constant burn in my throat. But moonrise was close, so close. Then I heard it, a single howl different from the others, a rallying cry. and answering howls, closer than they should be. They'd realized the deception. They were regrouping, tightening the net. I had to move, now. I crawled from my hiding place, every joint protesting. I had to get back to the settlement. It was the last place they'd expect the prey to run, toward the heart of the predator's den. I'd made it maybe halfway when I sensed him. Not heard, not smelled, sensed. A presence like static before lightning. I turned. Kayal stood between two trees in human form, watching me. Moonlight painted silver streaks in his dark hair. He made no move toward me. He simply stood there, his pale eyes holding mine across the distance. He had found me. The alpha had found his prey. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Failure. Capture. But he didn't call out. He didn't move. He simply nodded. A faint, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Then he turned and walked away, deliberately, making noise, leading any nearby hunters away from my position. He'd found me, and he'd let me go. I didn't waste the gift. I ran. I burst from the tree line into the courtyard just as the full moon crested the mountain peaks, bathing Frosthold in spectral light. I collapsed to my knees on the stones, gasping, shaking, my clothes torn, my feet bleeding. The entire pack was there, waiting. Helena stood at the front, her face unreadable. "Moonrise," she announced, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "She has survived the hunt." The pack erupted. Cheers, protests, shouts of disbelief. Helena raised a hand, and slowly, silence returned. She walked toward me. I forced myself to stand, though my legs trembled. "You used the forest as a weapon. You played to your strengths, not our expectations. That is not stupid." "It's how I've always survived," I managed between gasps. "The next trial is in 3 days, the gauntlet. It will test different skills. Rest, you'll need it." She leaned closer, her icy eyes holding mine. "I might actually live through this, human. Don't make me regret that thought." As she walked away, Lyra appeared with a water skin. "Drink, slowly." I drank, the water so sweet it hurt. Kayal approached through the dispersing crowd. He stopped before me, his eyes scanning my injuries. "You're hurt." "I'm alive," I corrected, my voice raspy. That was the point. A corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. "You did more than survive. You made them think. That is a greater victory than you know." He offered his arm. "Come, you need rest, food, and those feet seen to." As I took his arm, leaning on his strength, I scanned the crowd. Most faces showed grudging respect or continued hostility. But one face stood out. Theron. He stood at the back, apart from the others, and he wasn't looking at me with surprise or respect. He was looking at me with intense, focused calculation. And when our eyes met, he gave that same sharp, secret smile he'd given in my room. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain night went through me. I had survived the hunt, but I had the unsettling feeling I'd just stepped onto a different, more dangerous game board. And Theron, Helena's son, was a player whose motives I couldn't begin to guess. The 3 days between the hunt and the gauntlet passed in a blur of healing and hidden lessons. Frosthold's healer, an ancient Lycan named Orin with hands gnarled like tree roots, tended my wounds with efficient kindness. "You climbed Stonefang with human feet," he grunted as he wrapped my blistered soles. "Either very brave or very foolish, usually the same thing." Lyra, surprisingly, became a sporadic guide. She showed me the layout of Frosthold, the great hall of the warrior barracks, the weaving huts, the smokehouses. "If you are to be Luna, you should know what you're supposedly leading," she said, her tone still brusque but lacking its earlier venom. Kayal was often absent, dealing with pack matters, but he checked on me each evening. Our conversations were brief, careful, two strangers learning the shape of each other's minds. He asked about my mother's journal. I asked about Frosthold's history. We spoke of everything except the growing tension, the trials to come, and the ghost of Alara that seemed to linger in every hall. It was on the second day that I found the library. Tucked behind the great hall was a room few seemed to visit, shelves carved into the living rock and filled with scrolls, tablets, and a few precious books. The air smelled of dust and old parchment, and there, in a shadowed corner, I found a history of the Frostfang pack. I read of its founding under the first Alpha, of wars with neighboring packs, of alliances and betrayals, and I read of Alara. She was described as a warrior queen, fierce and beloved, who fell 7 years ago defending Frosthold from a shadow attack that breached the walls. The details were vague, poetic. She stood against the darkness so her people might see the dawn. The account praised her strength, her loyalty, her sacrifice. But on the next page, in a different, messier hand, someone had scribbled a note in the margin. The walls shouldn't have fallen. The wards were strong. How did they get in? I stared at those words, a cold prickle at the base of my spine. How did they get in? A floorboard creaked. I snapped the book shut as Theron stepped from between two shelves. "You're finding bedtime stories, Kaelin?" "I seem to have a habit of appearing where I am," I said, keeping my voice light. "This is my favorite room," he said, running a finger along a shelf, full of old secrets and new ones being made. He nodded to the book in my hands. "Reading about our late Luna? A tragic tale. She was remarkable." There was something in his tone, not quite reverence, something more complicated. "You admired her?" "Everyone admired her," he said smoothly. "She was the ideal Lycan queen, strong, fearless, born of a great bloodline." He looked at me, his pale eyes glinting. "A hard example to follow." "Is that a warning?" "A simple observation." He wandered closer. "The gauntlet tomorrow. It's less about endurance, more about perception. They'll try to overwhelm you, confuse you, make you show your weaknesses." He picked up a small stone carving of a howling wolf. "My advice? Don't play their game. Play your own." "And what game is that?" "The one you're already winning," he said softly. "The game of being unseen until you choose to be seen. It unnerves them. It unnerves my mother." He left me alone with the dusty books and the unsettling margin note. That night, as I prepared for bed, I heard voices through the connecting door to Kael's chambers. It was slightly ajar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words caught me. "Kael, we cannot ignore the signs." Helena's voice, tight with frustration. "The boundary wards flickered again last night, in the same sector as last time, as 7 years ago." "I am aware, Helena." Kael's voice was tired. "I've doubled the patrols." "Patrols didn't stop it then. Alara."
"Do not," Kalar cut in, his voice suddenly sharp as broken ice. "Use her name as a weapon in this argument, not with me." A pause. "I grieve for her still, but my duty is to the living. These disturbances, they're not natural. And bringing a human into this, during this, it's a vulnerability we cannot afford." "Or it's exactly what we need," Kalar countered, his voice dropping. "A new perspective, eyes that see differently." "Or a weakness for our enemies to exploit," Helena shot back. "The gauntlet will prove which it is. If she fails, she won't." "You cannot know that." "I know," Kalar said, his voice final. "I have seen her heart. It is steadier than you know. Now leave me. We both have preparations." I heard footsteps, then the sound of Helena's door closing. Silence. I stood frozen in my room, my mind racing, boundary wards flickering, the same sector as 7 years ago. How did they get in? Alara's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mystery, and somehow my arrival, the trials, the tension, it was all connected to that unsolved mystery. I wasn't just being tested to see if I was worthy to be Luna. I was being tested to see if I would survive whatever was coming, whatever had come before. The gauntlet awaited, but now I understood it wasn't just a test of my worth. It was a distraction, a spectacle to keep the pack focused while something older and darker stirred at the edges of Frosthold. And Theron, with his ambiguous warnings and secret smiles, knew it. I was sure of it. I went to the window, looking out at the moonlit mountains. Somewhere out there, Boundaries were weakening. History was repeating. And I, the invisible human girl, was standing right in the center of it all. The morning of the gauntlet dawned with a sky the color of faded bruises. A storm was gathering over the peaks, and the air tasted of ozone and impending rain. The pack assembled not in the courtyard but in the great hall itself, the vast space lit by torches that threw dancing shadows on the stone faces of long-dead alphas carved into the walls. Helena stood at the center, clad in formal leathers. The gauntlet tests the mind and spirit. It is a trial of perception, judgment, and grace under the eye of the pack. Kaylin, step forward. I did, my simple gray dress feeling flimsy against the weight of so many watching eyes. The gauntlet has 4 challenges, Helena continued. You will face each in turn, observed and judged by the pack elders. Begin. The first challenge was deceptively simple. A young warrior, barely more than a boy with nervous eyes, handed me a large brimming bowl of water. Carry this from the hall's threshold to the hearth. Do not spill a drop. I took the bowl. It was heavier than it looked, the water sloshing dangerously. As I took my first step, a Lycan woman accidentally bumped my shoulder. I staggered, water slopping over the rim onto my hands. A murmur went through the crowd. I steadied myself, adjusted my grip, and took another step. A man stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop suddenly. More water spilled. This wasn't a test of carrying, it was a test of harassment, of maintaining focus while others tried to make you fail. I thought of my father's court, of the subtle digs, the accidental slights. I knew this game. I didn't look at the jostlers. I looked at the water. I focused on its surface, on keeping it level. I moved slowly, deliberately, accepting the bumps and shoves as if they were gusts of wind. When a young warrior pretended to trip, sending a spray of water toward the bowl, I simply shifted my weight, letting the water settle rather than fight it. By the time I reached the hearth, the bowl was only half full, but I had not dropped it, nor had I reacted with anger or panic. Helena gave a curt nod. Proceed. The second challenge was at a small table set with 3 scrolls. An elder with a face like weathered bark pointed to them. These contain 3 disputes within the pack. Read them. Propose a solution for each. I unrolled the first, a dispute over hunting grounds between 2 families. The second, a complaint about the distribution of winter stores. The third, an accusation of a stolen ceremonial dagger. They were complex, layered with history and wounded pride. I took a deep breath. This was about listening, about seeing the pattern beneath the words. I gave my judgments not as commands, but as compromises that acknowledged each side's honor. For the hunting grounds, a rotating schedule. For the stores, a transparent council to oversee distribution. For the dagger, a public ritual of apology and a new blade forged by both families together. The elders exchanged glances. My solutions weren't Lycan solutions. They lacked the blunt force of an alpha's decree, but they were fair. They sought peace, not victory. Unconventional, the bark-faced elder rumbled, but not without wisdom. Proceed. The third challenge was the one I feared most. They brought in a warrior, a massive man named Rook, clutching a bleeding gash on his arm. The wound was deep, ugly, and clearly real. Heal him, Helena said. I had no magic, no Lycan healing speed. I had my mother's journal and 2 days of frantic study. I asked for hot water, clean cloth, and my bag. My hand shook as I laid out the herbs I'd gathered. Yarrow to staunch bleeding, comfrey leaf for healing, willow bark for pain. I worked quickly, cleaning the wound, applying the poultice, binding it tightly. It was basic human field medicine. Rook watched me, his dark eyes unreadable. When I finished, he flexed his arm. The pain is less, he admitted, his voice a gravelly surprise. The bleeding has stopped. A ripple of interest went through the crowd. It wasn't a miraculous healing, but it was something. It was useful. The final challenge was at the high table set for a feast. I was to sit beside Kalar's empty chair and be questioned by the pack. For an hour, they came. Warriors, crafters, mothers, elders. They asked about human customs, about my family, about my intentions. Some questions were curious, some were hostile barbs disguised as inquiry.
Can your human prayers protect us from the shadow sickness? What use is a queen who cannot shift? Do you think you can replace Alara? I answered honestly when I could, deflected gracefully when I couldn't, and when the question about Alara came, I met the asker's gaze squarely. I do not seek to replace anyone. I seek only to stand where I am placed and serve the pack as I am able. As the hour ended, Helena arose. The elders will confer. They withdrew to a side chamber. The hall was silent, tense. Lyra came to stand beside me. You didn't fold, that's something.
The pack erupted into worried murmurs. Kylar held up a hand for silence. This vigil is ended, he declared, his voice brooking no argument. Kaelin faced a true darkness and did not break. She used her knowledge to defend herself. She passes. He looked at the elders, his gaze challenging them to contradict him. None did. He wrapped his own cloak around my shoulders. Come, the bonding ceremony is in 2 days. We have much to discuss before then. As we walked back to Frosthold, the pack trailing behind us in tense silence, I looked over my shoulder at the sacred grove. The peaceful, silver moonlight now seemed like a lie. The shadow had been pushed back, not defeated. It had called me Gate, and someone within Frosthold's walls had opened a door for it. The 2 days before the bonding ceremony were shrouded in a silent storm. Frosthold buzzed with tension, but no one spoke openly of the shadow in the grove. It was the unspoken fear that hung over every conversation, every glance. Kylar and Helena were constantly in council with the elders. Patrols tripled. The boundary stones were checked and rechecked. I was kept close to the great hall, under the watchful eyes of Lyra and a rotation of warriors I didn't fully trust. My lessons shifted from pack customs to something darker, the history of the Warden's Gate. Kylar himself explained it to me in his chambers, his face grim in the firelight. Long before Frosthold was built, this mountain was a prison, not for mortal creatures, but for things of pure shadow and hunger, the Void Spawn. Our ancestors, the first Frostfang Alphas, were not just kings, they were wardens. They sealed the main breach, the Warden's Gate, deep beneath these mountains with rituals of moon and blood and spirit. And Alara? I asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. 7 years ago, on the night of the bonding moon, the wards failed. Not by accident, they were unraveled from the inside. The void spawn broke through, not at the main gate, but through a secondary fissure here, in Frosthold itself. Alara led the defense. She died, sealing the breach with her own life force. He looked into the flames. We thought it was a tragic one-time betrayal. We found the traitor, an elder obsessed with forbidden power. We executed him. We reinforced the wards. But now it's happening again. I finished. The flickering wards, the shadow in the grove. Someone is trying to reopen the way. Yes, and they used your vigil as a test. Your human spirit, unpracticed in shielding, was a bright lure. They wanted to see if they could bring something through, and if the new wards would hold. A terrible thought occurred to me. Kylar, the alliance with my father, my being here, was that part of it? Am I a distraction? He looked at me, his pale eyes fierce. No, you are the opposite. I chose you because I need a partner who sees in the dark, who notices the patterns others miss. The traitor 7 years ago worked in shadows, hidden by tradition and trust. I cannot fight shadows with more shadow. I need light. I need your eyes, Kylene. The weight of his trust was terrifying. What do we do? The bonding ceremony will proceed. The entire pack will be gathered, the rituals at their most potent. It is the perfect time for the traitor to make their final move, to disrupt the bonding of a new alpha pair, to shatter pack unity when our combined power is needed most. He leaned forward. But it is also the perfect time for us to unmask them. You must be the bait, one last time, and I will be the trap. The plan was simple and terrifying. During the ceremony, at the moment when the Alpha and Luna's bond is symbolically forged before the pack, the traitor would likely act to kill me, to discredit Kylar, to create chaos. We would be ready. The day of the ceremony arrived. Frosthold was transformed with garlands of winter berries and silver ribbons. The pack gathered at the stone circle, an ancient ritual ground under the open sky. I was dressed in a simple white gown, edged with gray fur, my hair braided with sprigs of sacred cedar. I looked like a Lycan bride, but I felt like a soldier walking to a battlefield. Kylar stood at the circle's center, clad in ceremonial armor, etched with protective runes. He looked like a king from the old stories, powerful and solemn. Our eyes met, and he gave me the barest nod. Steady heart. Helena began the rites, her voice chanting the old words. The pack joined in, a low harmonic hum that vibrated in the stone beneath my feet. The ritual was beautiful, weaving together the pack's collective spirit, the mountain's strength, the moon's cold light. We reached the pivotal moment. Helena presented the bonding cup, a chalice of moon water and sacred herbs. Kylar and I were to drink from it together, signifying our shared duty. As Helena handed me the cup, our fingers brushed. Her icy eyes held mine, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it. Not hostility, but a frantic, desperate warning. Her lips moved silently. Not the cup. My blood ran cold. I took the cup, my mind racing. The poison wasn't planned from an attack from the crowd. The poison was in the cup, meant for me or for both of us. I lifted the cup as if to drink, but instead, I let my trembling hands slip. The chalice fell, clattering against the stone, the liquid sissing where it touched the ground, eating into the rock. Silence. Then, uproar. "Poison!" someone shouted. Kylar's gaze snapped to Helena. "You handed her the cup." All eyes turned to the second. Helena stood tall, her face a mask of shock that slowly melted into something else, not hostility, but a profound sorrow. "You think it is me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Then it rose, filled with a bitter grief. "After all I have done for this pack? After I lost my dearest friend to the very darkness you let back in?" She wasn't looking at Kylar. She was looking past him, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Show yourself, coward, you who hide behind my son's face." From behind a ritual stone, Farron stepped into the circle. But it wasn't Theron. His familiar features shimmered, melted, and reformed. The wheat-colored hair darkened, the green-gold eyes shifted to a chilling, familiar amber. The stranger from my father's hall stood before us, wearing Farron's clothes, a cruel smile on his lips. The pack gasped. Lyra drew her blade. "Greetings, Aunt Helena. You were always too perceptive for your own good." "Where is the real Farron?" Helena demanded, her voice trembling with fury.
"Safe," the imposter shrugged. "For now, he was useful. His closeness to you, his knowledge of the wards, his access to the sacred herbs for the poison." He looked at me, that amber gaze glinting. "And you, little human, so troublesome. You were supposed to die in the grove, a failed candidate, a symbol of the Alpha's weakness. Then the poison today would have finished him, grief-stricken and distracted. The pack would be leaderless, the wards in chaos. The gate would open." His smile widened. "But you didn't die. You survived. You noticed things. You forced my hand." He spread his arms, addressing the pack. "My name is Malcor, son of the elder you executed 7 years ago for betrayal." He wasn't trying to unleash the void spawn. He was trying to control them, to use their power to make Lycans the true rulers of this world, not just wardens hiding in the mountains. He saw a greater destiny, and you killed him for it. He looked back at Kylar. "Now I will finish his work, and I will start by taking everything from you, as you took everything from me." Malcor's form began to shift, not into a wolf, but into something hybrid and monstrous, shadows leaking from his form. He was half Lycan, half something corrupted by the void. Kalar moved, shifting into his great silver wolf in mid-leap, but Malcor was ready. He didn't fight Kalar directly. He lunged not for the alpha, but for the circle of elders, for the heart of the pack's ritual formation, aiming to break their unity and weaken the mountain's wards. Chaos erupted, warriors surged forward, but Malcor was a whirlwind of shadow and claw, moving with unnatural speed. I stood frozen, watching the battle. Then I saw it. While everyone fought Malcor, the spilled poison from the chalice was seeping along a faint crack in the stone circle, a crack that glowed with the same sickly light as the shadow in the grove. It was following a pattern, heading toward the central altar stone. He wasn't just here to kill, he was here to finish a ritual. The spilled poison was a component, the chaos was the distraction. I didn't have strength or speed, but I had eyes, and I had the one thing Malcor hadn't accounted for, a human who knew herbs. I ran not away from the fight, but toward the healer's hut. I burst inside, ignoring Oren's shout, and grabbed what I needed, a pouch of pure silver dust used for healing burns, a vial of moon-blessed oil, and a handful of sun-dried summer blossoms, the antithesis of shadow. I raced back to the stone circle. Malcor and Kalar were locked in a titanic struggle, but the crack was now pulsing with dark light. I didn't have time for ceremony. I poured the silver dust into the crack, following its path. I dumped the oil and crushed blossoms onto the central altar stone. "Kalar!" I screamed over the din. "The stone! Now!" He understood. With a mighty roar, he broke from Malcor and brought his powerful jaws down on the altar stone, not to break it, but to channel his alpha power, pure, focused Lycan spirit, into it. The silver dust ignited with a cool blue-white flame. The oil and blossoms flared with golden light. The dark pulse in the crack met this combination of opposing forces: silver, purity; summer sun, life; alpha spirit, order, and recoiled. A scream, not from Malcor's throat, but from the shadow itself, tore through the air. The crack sealed with a sound like a thunderclap. The connection Malcor was using to draw power was severed. He stumbled, the shadows around him flickering, his form wavering. In that moment of vulnerability, Helena was there, not with a warrior's roar, but with a mother's grief and fury. She plunged her silver-tipped dagger into the shadow where his heart should be. Malcor looked down, astonished. His amber light in his eyes guttered and died. He collapsed, his form shifting back to that of a man, his face finally showing not malice, but the lost, lonely boy he had once been. Silence returned, broken only by heavy breathing. It was over. The aftermath was a blur of healing and revelation. The real Theron was found, drugged but alive, locked in a storage cellar. He'd been taken the night before my gauntlet. Malcor, a master of illusion and mind magic, had impersonated him perfectly, using his position to sabotage the grove's wards and poison the chalice. Helena, her hands stained with the blood of her nephew, seemed to age a decade in a night. Her suspicion was correct, but her fear had blinded her to the traitor being so close. She stood before Kalar and the council, offering her resignation. Kalar refused it. "You fought for the pack, even against your own blood. Your place is here." The bonding ceremony was reconvened a week later, under a clear, starlit sky. This time there was no tension, only a solemn joy and hard-won unity. The pack had seen the threat within and without. They had seen their alpha fight for them, and they had seen the human he chose stand her ground, not with tooth and claw, but with perception and courage. When Helena handed me the new bonding cup, her grip was firm, her eyes clear. "The pack sees you now, Kaylin," she murmured, "as do I." Kalar and I drank together. The water was clean, cold, and tasted of moonlight and promise. As the ritual ended, the pack's howl rose into the night, not a challenge, but an acceptance, a welcome. Later, in the quiet of our shared chambers, Kalar turned to me. "You saw what no one else did. You broke his ritual, not with strength, but with understanding. I just used the tools I had, the ones I've always had. That is what makes you the Luna Frosthold needs, not a replacement for the past, but a guardian for the future, a partner. I looked out the window at the settlement below, now truly seeing it not as a fortress of strangers, but a home. The shadows were still out there, the warden's gate still needed guarding, but the walls were strong, the pack was united, and I was no longer the invisible girl in the corner. I was Kaelin, friend to the healer Orin, respected by the warrior Lyra, advisor to the Alpha. I had a place, I had a purpose. I had come to Frosthold as a sacrifice for an alliance. I would stay as its Luna, not because a king chose me, but because I had earned my place. With steady heart and steady hands, I had not just survived, I arrived. And as the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the mountains in a blanket of quiet white, I knew with a deep, unshakable certainty, this was exactly where I was meant to be. The end. Kalar, who had observed everything from a shadowed alcove, approached. He said nothing, but his eyes held a quiet approval. The elders returned. Helena's face gave nothing away. "The gauntlet is passed," she announced, a mix of reactions, some nods, some scowls. "The final trial, the vigil in the sacred grove, will take place tomorrow night." I had passed. Relief washed through me, so potent it made me lightheaded. But as the crowd dispersed, I saw Theron leaning against a pillar. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching his mother, a thoughtful, almost troubled expression on his face. And then his eyes shifted to a shadowed corner of the hall, where a figure stood, half hidden. The man from my father's hall, the one with the amber-eyed smile. He was here, inside Frosthold. Our eyes met across the crowded room. His smile returned, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips. Then he placed a finger to his lips in a gesture of silence, turned and vanished into the darkness of a corridor. The victory of the gauntlet turned to ice in my veins. He wasn't just an observer. He was inside the walls, and he wanted me to know it. The sacred grove was a circle of ancient silver-barked trees at the heart of a hidden valley behind Frosthold, their branches intertwined high above, forming a living cathedral open to the sky. Under the light of the waxing moon, everything was painted in shades of silver and deep blue. "This is the vigil," Helena said, her voice unusually solemn. "You will remain here from moonrise to moonset, alone. This trial tests your connection to the spirit of the pack, to the land itself. You must open yourself. Listen. Return at dawn with the insight you have gained." It sounded mystical, but as I stepped into the circle, the hair on my arms stood up. This wasn't just a spiritual place. It was a place of power. I could feel it humming in the earth, in the air. "Good luck, little human," Lyra said from the edge of the grove. Then she and Helena were gone, leaving me utterly alone. The night deepened. I sat on a flat stone at the grove's center, wrapped in a fur cloak, and tried to listen. I heard the wind in the leaves, the distant cry of a night bird, the rustle of small creatures, but no great vision came. No wolf spirit spoke to me, just the cold, the silence, and my own racing thoughts about amber-eyed strangers and flickering wards. Hours passed. The moon climbed to its zenith. I was beginning to think the test was merely one of endurance against boredom and cold, when I felt it, a sudden sharp drop in temperature. The grove's gentle hum of power stuttered, then changed pitch, becoming a dissonant, angry vibration. The shadows between the trees, they thickened. They began to move against the wind, pooling and swirling with a sentient malice I recognized. It was the same creeping darkness that had taken the villages near my father's lands, the very thing the Alliance was meant to fight. It was here, in the sacred grove, inside Frosthold's innermost sanctum. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through me. This was no test. This was an attack. A shadow figure stepped from the coalescing shadows. Not the amber-eyed man. This was something else. A form of shifting darkness, featureless save for 2 points of cold, hungry light where eyes should be. It made no sound, but the very air screamed in its presence. I scrambled to my feet, my back against the stone. "Do not run," Kalar's voice echoed in my mind. "Running triggers the hunt." But this wasn't a hunt. This was predation. The shadow thing flowed toward me. I had no weapon, no magic, only my mother's journal and the contents of my belt pouch. In blind desperation, I grabbed a handful of the crushed herbs I'd saved from the hunt, a mix of nightshade, wolfsbane, and sacred sage from the healer stores. I didn't know if it would work on shadow, but it was all I had. As the darkness reached for me, I threw the powder into its form. A hiss, like water on hot iron, filled the grove. The shadow recoiled, the points of light flaring with what looked like pain. The herbs glowed with a faint silver light where they touched it, holding it at bay. But it was already regrouping, the darkness healing. It was then I heard it, a whisper, not in my ears, but in my mind. A voice of crumbling stone and forgotten graves. "Weak, mortal, gate." Gate? What gate? The shadow surged again. I fumbled for another handful of herbs, but my pouch was almost empty. This was it. I was going to die in this grove, and the pack would think I failed my vigil, that my human spirit was too weak. A howl tore through the night, not from the forest, from above. A silver-gray wolf, massive and magnificent, landed between me and the shadow with a sound of cracking stone. Kalar. In his eyes, I saw not the controlled alpha, but a feral, protective rage. The shadow hesitated, sensing a greater power. They faced each other, power against void. Then, from the trees, other wolves emerged. Lyra, Helena, Farron, a dozen warriors. They formed a circle around the grove, their eyes glowing in the dark, a low, collective growl building in their throats. The pack had come. The shadow thing seemed to weigh its odds. Then, with a final silent snarl, it dissolved back into the lesser shadows and was gone. The oppressive cold lifted. The grove's natural hum returned, weak but steady. Kalar shifted back to human form, naked and breathing heavily, his body covered in a fine sheen of sweat that wasn't from exertion. It was from confronting something that shouldn't exist. "Are you hurt?" Kalar demanded, his eyes scanning me. I shook my head, trembling uncontrollably. It spoke. It said, "Gate." All the Lycans stood still. Helena's face was pale. "The Warden's Gate," she whispered, a name that carried profound dread. Kalar's jaw clenched. The wards didn't just flicker, they were tested. Here. He looked at me, his gaze intense. "It came for you. The vigil makes one's spirit visible to things that listen. It drew it to you." "So my trial was a beacon for that?" I asked, my voice small. "No," Farron spoke up, his usual smirk gone. He looked at his mother, his expression hard. "The trial should be safe. The grove's wards are the strongest in Frosthold, or they were." He turned to Kalar. "Someone lowered them, just enough. Someone who knew she would be here, alone and vulnerable." The accusation hung in the air. Sabotage from within.